Did you know that your marketing data can reveal exactly what's working in your campaigns and what's not? With Morpheus, the response model gives you a clear view of how your actions impact the results. In this video, we will take you step by step through the process of interpreting these models to optimize your decisions and maximize your role. Today, we are going to focus on understanding all the information, all the insights that Morpheus provides us. Just a quick reminder of the variables. Always remember the payment variables here and here, the contextual variables, in this case, the weather, and finally the KPI, which is our total set. Today's video is going to be about understanding these little boxes we have here, all these graphs that I think are really interesting to understand. And we're going to go through them one by one so that everything is clear for you. First, we have what's called response model accuracy, which in this case depends on the data we have. It relies on how accurately we train it, which will give us one result or another. So it's just to have this information so we know it. Next, we have what we call the current media allocation. The current media allocation basically tells us how our investment is currently distributed, where we see 21% in YouTube, 21% in Spotify ads, 20% in Facebook ads, 20% in LinkedIn ads, and 18% in email. Pretty balanced. Next, we see section here, which is the media effects average. This one is really important. Why? Because here it tells us how it has contributed to our KPI, in this case to sales, because investing more doesn't always mean we'll get better results. For example, here we see that the biggest investment has been in YouTube ads at 21%, and it has also contributed the most with 14.86. But we see that in this case, even though the distribution is quite balanced, not everyone has contributed the same. We see that YouTube has contributed 14.86 and email marketing has contributed 10.3% in this case. More investment doesn't always lead to better results. The next thing we're going to look at is very similar to what we saw earlier. In fact, before we looked at MediaSex, and now we're looking at MediaSex Weekly, which shows the contribution by week. In this case, we simply see the total sales attributed to each of the channels over this time period by week, considering that we're looking at a total of 2 years. Here we see the cross-channel impact, which is a very important point, and it's also essential to know how to read it correctly. In this case, we simply see the total sales attributed to each of the channels over this time period by week, considering that we're looking at a total of 2 years. Here we see the cross-channel impact. This is a very important point, and it's also essential to know how to read it correctly. This is read in one direction, meaning at this point, like this, that's why we have it marked. Although we can point it out this way, we recommend reading it here. What does it mean to us? For example, notice that it tells us that if we're investing in Facebook ads, in this case, let's say that investing in Spotify ads isn't something that helps or has an influence, to put it better, on Facebook ads. In other words, if I'm investing a lot in Facebook ads and I want to increase the Spotify ads, that would be a mistake because it's not helping. In fact, it's the opposite. For example, if we want to invest in Spotify ads, investing in LinkedIn ads or YouTube ads does help or has an influence, to put it better, on Spotify. Okay? It's important to know how to read this because sometimes the influence isn't the same. In other words, it's not the same influence. If I invest in email marketing or if I invest in Facebook ads, whether email marketing helps me or not, compared to the opposite, where if I invest in email marketing, it does help me invest in Facebook ads, which we see has a little bit of an effect, as opposed to the platform. We're continuing with the KPI summary breakdown. Here we have a total indicator of 6, ranging from 14,000 to pleasant 14,000, marked from red to blue, and we can see how it influences us. So in this case, with blue being the maximum value of 6 and red, the minimum value, as you can clearly observe, comprehend, and understand, we see that the average temperature has had a significant negative impact, right? While we see that seasonality, for example, is almost completely neutral, what I mean is 1.0, which means it neither helps nor harms. So we can say it has no influence. Okay. There's also the option to look at it here by month, which makes it a bit clearer, and also here in a very quick way. I think this graph might be surprising at first when you see it, but if you really look at it, you can quickly see, as we mentioned, that the temperature variable has had a negative effect. However, we do see that the minimum temperature in this case had a positive impact in July 2022 and also in August 2023. Okay, so it's important to really see this point. Let's keep looking at the lag and carryover. What does this mean? It means at what point it has, let's say, its maximum impact. I always recommend that you create a child for each and see the channel. Let's examine each one. Email marketing peaks a week later, lasting about a week and a half. After 2 weeks, change the creative. Facebook ads last about a week, and changes should be considered after a week and a half. Never exceed 2.5 weeks. Ideally, change ads within 2 weeks, preferably 1.5. Spotify ads are similar to Facebook, with a peak at 1 week. After 2 weeks, start new ads. Facebook ads last a week, change by 2 weeks, max 2.5. Spotify ads are similar, peaking at 1 week. New ads after 2 weeks. YouTube ads peak at 1 week, change after a week and a half. New videos weekly. If spend exceeds ad stock, it's positive, indicating profit. Spotify and Facebook ads peak at 1 week. New ads after 2 weeks. LinkedIn ads last up to 3 weeks. YouTube ads change after a week and a half. Promote new videos weekly. Ad spend should exceed ad stock for success. Peaks show positive performance. Non-media contributions are key, with influence from 30,000 to 20,000. High temperatures can drop influence to 24,000. For example, LinkedIn has a much longer period. It still peaks at 1 week, but it holds up much longer. In other words, we can maintain it well for 2 weeks. And even at 2.5 to 3 weeks is when we should start considering changing the ads. Lastly, if we look at YouTube ads, we see that it lasts less, even though it peaks at 1 week. But notice that after a week and a half, we should be changing it. In other words, we should promote different videos, for example, putting out a new one each week. Here we see the ad to consumer response. What this means is the spend, which is what the user has spent in this case. So what we need to see here is that if we see that the spend is above the ad stock, it means we're doing well. To put it simply, it's like we've earned more than we've invested. In this case, we see a peak, which would be very positive because the spend is above the ad stock. This is not the case here, where the ad stock is much higher, and we can look at it week by week. Next, we move on to the non-media contribution, where it's very important to pay attention to the indices. Notice that in this case, the influence ranges from a maximum of 30,000 to a minimum of 20,000. Of course, if I, for example, do a high analysis and look at it one by one, if I check the temperature, be careful because it goes down to 24,000. This means that the average temperature has a negative influence. In this case, the maximum temperature seems to have a negative influence too, but notice it's at 1/200. Which is nothing compared to the 24,000 we saw earlier. Or the minimum temperature, notice that it goes up to 16,000. Now this is starting to get relevant. Remember, the maximum was 30,000, so this is definitely becoming more significant. And this way we can look at, for example, seasonality. Notice also the playing point. Here it seems like there's a clear seasonality, which is true that it seems like there's something there, but it doesn't affect us too much. There are some things that do and others that don't affect us. In this case, there are, but they don't impact us. And also, essentially, looking at the other number and contribution would mean that, like the others, it indicates that we lack information to attribute the channels. All right. And finally, we see this point. Remember, it's very important. We're looking at things from the past, meaning what we've invested. In this case, we see how much we should ideally invest. Here we see Facebook telling us how much to invest, which would be around 12,000 or so in this case. Here we keep looking, but we're still at a good point, maybe up to 15,000. But be careful, in no case should we reach 55,000, which is already a saturation point. It would be good to stay around 12,000 to 15,000, maybe 20,000. This point here, if we go to Facebook ads, notice that it's much smaller. Ideally, when it comes to being the most profitable, the maximum benefit is around 10,000 to 11,000 or about 12,000. In this case, we see the same thing. We should never reach that saturation point. If we look at Spotify ads, we also see that it peaks at around 11,000. LinkedIn ads also has a maximum of about 11,000, okay? YouTube ads also show us roughly to what extent we should invest and how long it holds up, which is also important. Pay attention to the little points. And well, with this, we obviously then have the optimization section. But I consider that in this case, with this, we see quite important information to be able to analyze. Well, as always, I hope you liked this video. Thank you so much for your attention.